My apologies, I said the next video would be covering the body fitting, and that is all, obviously, as you can see, that's a lot of work has gone into that, and there's more to come. The problem is it's February right now, and the next thing I need to do is attack these panel gaps, which means I need to do some body work, and the materials you use don't really like it to be 48 degrees and raining. All right, I'm going inside. So that's a little bit on hold. So what I'm going to do in this video is walk you through some things like how I made the seats, a little bit on a quick overview of the electrical system, the fire suppression system, and why don't we start it off with the radiator and the plumbing for that. So, oh, what do you know? There's an oak leaf. Today we're going to take care of the plumbing here, but I thought I would start off by saying the way this got mounted in here, it's just extra sheet metal in here, and then I needed to come up a little bit on the side, so there's these triangle pieces on each side. And I've got rubber sandwiched between this and the radiator, and that's so that if your chassis has any flexing or anything, it's not tearing apart your radiator when it happens, or just vibrations. Right now I just have this mocked up. These aren't attached, and attaching them's fairly easy, although, oh, never mind, they're stuck and they're not coming out, so I guess we'll just leave them in. Wow. Okay, well, let's take this off. The thing that I still need to do is, there we go, these pipes in between, which it's just leftover tubing I had from when I ran the tubing down the middle. These don't have beads on them yet. So I'm going to put a bead on. I'm going to show you how I do that, show you some of the options. These are just silicone elbows. I've read on the internet that people have problems with these sealing. I've never had a problem, but I've always used this product. It's this blue goop that you put on here to help it seal, and it's a neat stuff in that it never solidifies. It always stays kind of this waxy, sticky stuff. So if you have to disassemble this from time to time and you put it back on, it keeps working. Thing is, I'm out of it right now, so I'm going to try doing this without that and see if I have any trouble. There's nothing complicated here. This is all 1.5 inch tubing. This radiator is a GT40 style radiator. It's actually the exact same radiator I got from the same place as the one I'm using on the GT40. This is a 3-row. They come in 2-row, 3-row, and 4-row thicknesses. And I've never had a cooling problem on the GT40, but I am using a bigger engine, so this might not be enough radiator, but consider I'll mainly be autocrossing, and I've got an electric water pump and electric fan, so I can cool it with the engine off in between runs. This should be fine. If it's not, if I have to, I can step this up to a 4-row. It'll be a little bit thicker. I'll probably have to shave this edge down here. I was expecting to have to shave this edge when I put this in, and it fits perfectly. That was just total stupid luck that fits onto this as well as it does right now. Okay, but enough rambling. Let's go put some beads on this and then clamp everything up. For a long time, on all the pipes on the first 2 cars I built and other things, I used this tool, which I got from Summit, and it was about $40, and obviously it only does one size of tube, but what you do is you stick this into your tube, and I don't want to stick all the way in because I don't want to get stuck right now, but you pop that in, and then you tighten it down, and as you turn this, it rotates the whole thing and forces these ball bearings out, and it slowly but surely makes a bead in here. And what I've learned is you want to grease it before every use, and you want to really support this. I usually end up having to put like a pipe wrench on this while turning the other thing. Sometimes it gets stuck in there. It's really a giant pain in the butt and takes a fair amount of elbow grease, but it does work. And doing this meant I didn't have to buy a $200 bead roller or something. When I got to this project though, I thought, why don't I invest in something that doesn't drive me insane? And so I went to see, can I get just a small bead roller that's just meant for tubing, that's not going to do all the other kind of bead rolling you can do. And I found that this guy, which you can get everywhere, they sell it on Amazon, they sell it everywhere, is $40. So this is the same price as this. This might even be more expensive now because I bought this over 10 years ago. So I highly recommend this. You can do different size tubing. It's got a range, and it just works better. And you get a pretty darn good bead on it that way. So these are the more expensive smooth band hose clamps you can get. I want to say these are like $2 a clamp, which, you know, I need 8 right here and I think 10 in the rear or more. I've actually had problems with these. Maybe I'm just an idiot, but these guys are cheaper. They're clearly not as fancy, but they're also smooth in that the groove doesn't cut into the hose, and I've never had a problem with these. Something of note is, obviously this is very tightly packaged, and this is one of the brake reservoirs. And this hose is right up near it. There is, I can't get the camera on it, there is actually a gap between the two. I've got some leftover heat shielding cloth. I might put that through here. I mean, it shouldn't be an issue. I usually run like 180 degrees, so you know, maybe 200 on a bad day. And the brake fluid boils at 550, but it just seems like there's no reason to be preheating your brake fluid. Oh, another note, I wanted black ones, which they had, but the black ones were $4 a piece more. These were $8 a piece, and the black ones were $12 a piece. So I got blue ones. Okay, now I'm a little concerned that at least one of those hose clamp ends is going to hit this when it comes down, because this is all a really tight fit. So we're going to lower this and find out, and if it does, we'll take that off and reposition it. Yeah, it's hitting it. So what's going on is when this comes down, it's hitting this guy right here. And I've got room here, I can put it on the other side. I've oriented it that way so it'd be easier to reach when you take it on and off, but looks like we'll just go the other way. But just to give you an idea of how tightly packaged this all is, I'm kind of proud of how tightly packaged this is and how well it all fits together, but that implies that I'm that good and this wasn't all just luck, and a lot of this was luck. Okay, now you can see I've moved that so it goes the other way. And let's try lowering it again. Oh, there we go. And then back here, our pipes come out down there, and I have it going to this swirl tank. I find it on eBay. This one's made for an RX-7. The only thing I care about is the ports are 1.5 inch. So that matches everything else we're doing. So we've just got an elbow on here, and this will eventually go into the inlet on the intake manifold. And down here, this will come out here and then go up to where the water pump's got its thing here. It's a little funky with, you know, the way these are here, but I've got it set so that the pipe that runs past the brake master cylinders is the cooler side of the water. That's the water after it's gone through the radiator. And that's just so I'm not running the hottest as hot water past the brake master cylinders. So then the swirl pot's got its overflow thing here, and it's going to a catch tank down here, which this has its port down the bottom and just a vent on the cap. Ideally, this would have another port up top going out back to get rid of any excess water, but I've run these cars a lot with no catch tank, and it's fine that, you know, whenever you top it up, or if it's like a really hot day and it hasn't been at a hot day since it's been topped up, it dribbles a little bit, and this is just enough to keep that from happening. One, for the environment, and two, so that 20-year-old guys who know nothing about old cars don't come by and say, hey, your water system's leaking. Another note on this is if this makes you nervous, having this right behind somebody's head, it does for me too. The thing is, this is similar to how it's done on my Indy car, and I've never had a problem with it, meaning I've never been horribly burned. And I'm very rarely ever going to have somebody in that seat. So if anything, this is better than the Indy car because it's not directly behind my head. And anybody that rides in here will naturally have to sign a release of liability. And then moving back towards the front, we've got the fire suppression system, which let me just start off by saying, if you're doing a fire suppression system, that generally means it's because you're building a race car and you're going to be racing it. So what you need to do is follow the rules for whatever racing series you're going. If you're going to pass tech inspection, you have to do the fire system the way they want the fire system done. I mean, that's going to dictate how big the bottle is based on what kind of car you're racing and their rules. How big the bottle is, it could dictate what type of extinguisher it is, how many activation handles there are for it, and may even affect nozzle placement. Now, I'm not running with anything that requires a fire suppression system. I'm just doing autocrosses and track days in this thing, or driving around the ranch. So what I'm doing is something that allows me some sense of safety. I've done a number of race cars and had to have them meet the technical requirements. So I understand the different requirements and I like and respect them. But at the same time, we're doing this on a little bit of a budget. So this is as cheap of a system as you can get that meets the criteria that I needed. And some of my restrictions here are how big the space that it needs to go in. A lot of bottles are longer than this. This is a 5-pound bottle. Depending on the size of your car, you may need a 10-pound bottle or smaller, 3-pound bottle. This is the AFFF suppressant type, and it's less expensive than some of the newer stuff. The last time I did this, we were coming out of that time when Halon was no longer allowed to be used, and there really wasn't a good replacement yet. Now, shopping for this, there are some other options which sound really nice, and I'll explain. I picked this because I wanted 5 nozzles, 5 places that it's going to spray. And I was having a hard time finding that with the newer kind of stuff. And the newer kind of stuff is a gas-based, which is cool because it doesn't leave a mess everywhere that you have to clean up. The thing was, I couldn't find ones with enough nozzles, but I'm realizing now that that's because they have better coverage out of their nozzles. So you don't need 5. 3 nozzles would probably do what you need. But for me, why I wanted 5 is I've got the obligatory one under here, which is spraying across the passenger compartment to the driver compartment to get our leg area in there, primarily for me, but it'll also be helping if anybody's sitting here. Then what I want is one over here spraying, because in here is the fuel tank. And what I'm trying to do is, if there's someone in the passenger seat and they need to get out, I don't want this to be a giant blaze, or they've got to pass over this. The nice thing about this car compared to the GD40, which has its tanks on the side too, is really if you have to get out in a hurry, you don't open the door, you just jump over it. So that helps being a bit of a fire shield, but I do want this area covered. And then back in the engine compartment, I've got one on this side, which I'm not pointing at the engine right now. I'm pointing it at the fuel pump and fuel line. And then something that I'm going to change, and I want to show you why. This one in the middle here, you want that to be able to get a fire that's on top of the engine, meaning a fuel fire from your carburetor injectors there. And that's just too low, and like if I angle that up, it's just going to shoot over the engine. What it really needs to do is be up here somewhere. And so what I'm going to do is, it's got a connection back here, is I'm going to run a line up here, and we'll see once the engine's in, because I want to know, should I run it up here and point at it? I'd feel better about that, because this will get grabbed a lot and you don't want to get those tubes damaged. But the other option is to run it all the way up here with straps around it to hold it in place. And that way it's protected. I mean, as opposed to just running a line straight up here in the air. The tubing is fairly soft, which is nice to work with when you're running the lines. It's just got compression fittings like these T-junctions and then the nozzles, and they just press on and you're done. So the kits come with the nozzles, 2 of these pull handles, and then this is actually leftover tubing, which is pretty good because I did 5 nozzles. And anytime you've got a mid-engine car, usually your tank's in the front and you've got a pretty decent ways to go to reach the engine. It's aluminum tubing with a plastic outer sleeve, and then there's some plastic liner on the inside, and it forms really easily. Like it does not take a lot of force. I actually got excited when I was doing this because, like, oh hey, I've got brake line bending tools that I've paid money for and I rarely get to use, so that'll be great. I've got a straightening one, I've got one for doing radiuses, because you want to make sure that you don't bend this too tight and kink it, obviously. And you can test anything you do by just putting your mouth on and blowing through it. But really, I found I could bend it better by hand than I could with the tools, which doesn't make any sense. But you see just how easily it forms. The one thing that you really do want a tool for is cutting it, because if you just cut it with diagonal cutters or something, you're going to squash the tubing when you cut. So you get something like this. That you put on and slowly tighten and go around like that until you've made your cut. Depending on your rules, you may need both an exterior activation handle and an interior one. And really, you always want an interior one. A lot of times if it's an open cockpit car, you just have an interior one because somebody from the outside can just reach in and grab it. With this car, I actually don't have an interior one, but it's because when you're driving, I have another handle I could put in right here, but when you're driving, your hand's up here, you can just reach down and grab this, and then you're acting directly on this. There's one less thing that can fail. And that's actually something I've seen on other race cars, was that they didn't have a handle. I was like, oh, what do they do? And realized, oh, well, they just activate directly on the bottle, which makes more sense. But so with an open cockpit car and this car, somebody can just reach in and do it. But since they sent me 2 handles and I didn't want to use neither of them, I went ahead and put one back here so that someone from outside the car, the rear bodywork comes to about here. So this is just open, can just reach in. The thing I don't like about this location is, again, it's right by the fuel pump and the fuel line, and this is a likely place to have a fire. So somebody that needs to reach this may need to reach into a fuel fire, which isn't great. At a track, that person would have gloves on and possibly a full fire suit, so they'd be okay. But having your fire suppression pull handle be melting or on fire, that's not the greatest situation. Okay, and then on the electrical system, I'll walk you through what I did here. And again, part of this, if you're doing a race car, you need to do this to what the rules of whatever organization you're racing with dictate that you do. Because if you look at a lot of race cars in the 60s, they do not meet modern safety standards. Since I don't have anybody's rules that I need to meet, but I also want my car to be somewhat safe, I've got a little bit of a mix here. So I've got my master cutoff switch here, which is so that, because I've seen this on vintage cars and just thought, oh, hey, when I get in the car and realize I've forgotten to turn the master switch on, I can just reach over and grab it. But I'm going to explain why this isn't necessarily the best place for it from a safety standpoint. But just to walk you through the way mine's done, and then we'll talk about how, other options. So here, this is the master switch. This here turns on electricity to everything in the car, and you see my voltmeter's activated there. Here I can ground like my oil pressure sensor. So you see that working. So power's going from that cutoff switch, and then it's got some fat wires that are going to go to the alternator and then the relays in the back, and I'll show you the relays in a second. And this kind of cutoff switch has 4 posts, and it's so you can have a cutoff, a separate cutoff for the alternator, so that when you flip the cutoff there, your alternator isn't still feeding the car and keeping everything running when you're trying to kill it. So the power running to this switch here is power that's really just for sending signals to the relays. It's not the power that's running to the actual things being powered. And so what I mean, here I'll explain this. Over here we've got our switches, and I'll go through those in a second. But when you flip these on, well here, we'll do it with the starter, because the starter button's up here, and it's obviously not hooked up to a starter because there's no engine. that click you hear, it's not coming from here, it's coming from the relay in there, because this is getting its power from the on-off switch, and then it's sending a signal to one of these relays. Let's see if I can get this off. And then a much fatter wire that's coming from that same cutoff switch that's going directly back here is then feeding power that the relay is taking that signal, and if it gets a signal, it's then going to let the power from the big fat wire go from here to the starter on the engine. And it's doing that for, this is the starter, this is the fuel pump, this is the water pump, and this is the distributor and coil. So on the relays, if you're new to these things, there are both 4 and 5 pin relays. And I've got some of each here just because they were what I had. I don't need 5 pins for any of these. So here, I'll pull a 4 pin out, work with that. So what you get here is, one of these is going to be ground. One of them is going to be what the wire from your switch goes to. One is the peg that goes to whatever you're going to run power to, and the other runs the actual power that's going to go to this. So between these two, this is like a gateway between these two. If you have a 5 pin, the middle pin sends the power that's coming in here to something else when this gate is closed, meaning if you don't have power going to something, then that power gets sent somewhere else. And there's reasons to do that. I just don't have a reason for it here. The main reason for the relay is to be more efficient so that you're not running power all the way to there and then through that switch and then all the way back and then to the item. And I'm going to show another way you could do it if you didn't have that cutoff switch up there. That would be more efficient than the way I'm doing it. Relays really aren't period correct for something from the 60s, but I like them from an efficiency standpoint. Back with other race cars where lightness was really the thing, I always would try to run the lightest battery possible, and I found a lot of times just being efficient with how your electricity flowed made it possible to run a smaller battery. And what I mean is, I had a Lotus Europa that if I put a certain size battery in, the starter wouldn't quite turn over. And when I traced everything, I found that the signal wire going to the starter, now not the big fat cable that powers the actual turning, but just kind of the built-in relay on the starter, it was trying to flow like 13 amps or something like that. And all that electricity was coming from a battery in the back up to a switch in the front and then all the way back to the starter. And when I just changed that so that there was a relay on the back so the power came straight from the battery that was actually going to it, then it worked fine with a smaller battery. All I'd say, I like relays for making things work better. I also like them from a diagnostic standpoint in that click you heard earlier. That means when something's not working, the first thing I can do is listen for the click. If I'm not hearing the click, that tells me my problem's either in the wiring on the back of this or up here. You know, it's somewhere between here and here. If I'm hearing the click, then I know it's after the relay and it's between the relay and the item. Okay, so just a demonstration of things. These relays are the things on the back. The fans also have a relay, and it's just in the front under the steering rack on one side. But so there's a bunch of leaves in there, so it's going to throw those up. But if I turn the fans on, here, let's see, we've got fuel, which you can hear, pump right there. Water is the water pump, which there's no water pumping right now. Spark is the ignition. And something I do, and it's not foolproof, but it's better than nothing, is I have on the relays back here, the ignition relay for the coil and distributor gets its power from the water pump. And what that means is if you turn the switch on, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to get any power until the water pump's on. The idea being that I can't have the engine running without the water pump running. Now, this isn't foolproof because the water pump could still fail, but at least I know I haven't forgotten to switch on the water pump, and the water pump relay is at least working. So it's taking like 2/3 of the problems out of the equation. Okay, the one other switch down here for the keen observers is the Crow's switch, which is something I did on the GD40, and it's short for Crow's Landing. Crow's Landing is the airport in the Central Valley where I do a lot of my autocrossing. And in the summer, it is hot there. And you sit on grid, and what I've found happens is I get heat soak on the starter, and then my starter doesn't want to start the engine. Or really what it does is you go to start the car, and it goes, and I've never not gotten the car started, but it's a little nerve-wracking and kind of embarrassing. What I used to do in the GT40 was I ran a leaf blower into the vents on the side of the car to blow air onto the starter, and that cooled it off, and that works. But it's also kind of stupid to have to stand there with a leaf blower in between runs. So what I ended up doing was getting a PC fan, and I got 2 for $10, and this is the other one. And I cut this hole and put it in there, and you just turn the switch on when you're sitting on grid with the car off, and it blows air up at the starter, which would be mounted right there, and cools it off. Oh, I kind of brushed over this. The other topic here is, where are your fuses? Well, I ordered the wrong fuse panel, and now I'm still trying to decide what I want. What I was trying to get was some glass tube fuses, because they look period correct, and they'll go above here. What I ended up accidentally getting was a more modern style one, which is fine. There are advantages to those fuses, but it's got way too many. I only need 4. I could maybe make do with 5 or 6. You can get a fuse block kit like this from Amazon for like $40 that has 6, which I would have gotten, but I don't need 6, and fuses built in, and all the wiring pre-done. It looks like it's just got one wire coming out for power, and because I wanted to do my little trick on the ignition and water pump, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to wire it the way I wanted to. But anyways, so the fuse panel will go here. I like the look of the glass tube fuses, and having dealt with a lot of old cars, I like being able to stick a screw in when a fuse keeps blowing. So all that to say, that'll go in there. This is all just some leftover sheet aluminum that I folded to kind of cover this up and look better. This is just wrapped in electrical tape, and I'll have to undo this to splice in where the fuses go. But I try to do stuff here that's overly simple, so that when you've got to make a fix in the paddock, it's easy to diagnose and find the wire you're looking for. Okay, so options on the cutoff switch. So I mentioned having the master cutoff switch back here has its advantages, because especially if you have your battery back here, then it's really awesome. But if you have the battery in the front, like I do, my battery, we haven't talked about it, but my battery is in the passenger footwell up there. And it's a Optima battery. It's a blue top rather than the common red top, which is only because that one had the studs for the cables where I wanted them, so I paid the extra $30 for it. Okay, so the more efficient way of running the power back is usually to use the big fat cable that you've got that's going to power the starter, and then have your wires coming from that to your relays. And that's because this is going to have very little resistance, because it's such a big wire. It's got so much capacity for voltage. Obviously it's not hooked up, that's why it's not sparking when I do that. So I could actually run my relays off of that with wires from that. But the downside of that is that means this wire is not going through my master cutoff, it's going straight to the battery. So that means when I shut off the master cutoff, if the relays are working properly, yes, that will shut everything down. But if they're not working properly, I could still have live stuff back here. And if there's a fire, you really want your fuel pump to shut off. So I have separate wires coming from that master shutoff back to the alternator and back to the relays. So when I shut that off, I'm shutting off both the signal power to the relay and the power that the relay would be sending to the different components. If you want the big fat wire to be cut off too, obviously that's the safest way. You need a beefier master cutoff switch. So that's why you see a lot of these, this wire is actually always live if it's hooked up to the battery, or there will also be a cutoff on the negative terminal to protect against that, for when you're storing the car and whatnot. So all that to say, running the power to this thing is more efficient, but unless your cutoff switch is back here, then you're losing a level of safety. And because I wanted to be a lazy old man and have my cutoff switch where I could reach it, I'm doing it this way. Okay, today we are working on a seat. Now there's only going to be one real seat, and then on this side I'm going to put some foam in down here. The idea being that someone could sit there. I mean, when my kid and I are doing something together, but most of the time you would not have somebody over there. Okay, so seat options. A Creafoam bead seat is a great option for something like this because you can form it exactly to yourself. It's super comfortable. You get held in real nicely. It's fairly easy. If you look at them, they'll want to sell you a vacuum pump. That's great, but you can also just use a vacuum cleaner. The process takes a little bit of time, but it's not complicated. The downside to it is it's going to form to you. So if you know people that aren't shaped the same way you are, they're going to have a hard time fitting in the car. So what I like to do is do something more with pads where worst case scenario, you rip the pads out if you've got somebody bigger that's going to drive it. But what I'm going to do with this one is I'm making these aluminum things. This is going to be covered in padding, but it's so I don't have to have a huge amount of padding. I can just have some lights that here's some here that I'll glue around it, and I'll cover that Nomex somewhat for fire safety, somewhat just to have a fabric over it to conceal all the different pieces that I'm gluing together. But this is to give it some support so it's not just one giant foam pad. And so what I'm trying to do here is I don't have these stick out a long way. This is enough to be snug, especially with belts in. But I want these to be shallow so that they fit differently shaped people. But really this is just leftover aluminum I've got. You can kind of see how this is going to go together there. And this guy will go, I can do this one-handed like that. And again, this will all be covered in foam. The thing I've got, the tricky bit is under here is eyelet for the harness. So I've got to make sure there's an opening that's big enough, not just for the harness, but so that you can get your hand in there and get the harness on and off. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to finish mocking this up. I'm probably going to rivet this piece to this piece, and this will be riveted to the back. This, I don't want to put any more rivets in here. I don't want to mess with stuff there. But obviously, this gets supported. I mean, it'll be up against that. And I want this to have a little bit of give. I don't want this to be rock solid. Actually, I'd like to have a lot of give. It's basically metal padding that I'm creating. So I'm gonna get this stuff together and then figure out an opening here, and then we'll cover that with some foam and Nomex, and I'll just use headliner high temperature spray adhesive. We'll glue it all together and stick it in place. So I did the passenger seat, the kind of monkey seat, and on this one, I'm not doing all the extra supports. Remember, this opening is smaller than this one, so it's already a little more snug. And so I just did kind of this is some 1/2-inch foam covered in Nomex all the way around, and it makes it softer and more comfortable. You don't have to worry about sitting on hot aluminum except for up there. But this is just for occasional seating. On this, I was torn between looking at kind of early Can-Am cars have 2 fully upholstered seats, and then later ones have nothing here. Okay, so today we are covering these. See, let's get this in the light. I've got this done with foam. This is a 1/4-inch thick foam, and then spray on adhesive, and you have to wait 5 minutes before it gets tacky, and then I'm putting on Nomex. I've done it with vinyl before. The nice thing about vinyl is it's thick enough that it really hides how crude my foam work is. The Nomex is working fine. The thing with Nomex is you have to be careful not to put too much of this spray on. The spray will tell you to put it on both surfaces. I do that for the foam. I don't do that for the Nomex because it soaks through the Nomex and you can see it afterwards. Here's where we are now, which my shadow's going to fight this. I've got this bottom end. I've got the sides riveted in and all covered with Nomex and the foam. This here I haven't glued in yet. This is more just foam wrapped in Nomex, and you see it's got a little bit of a thing here, which it doesn't need. I just thought it made it look more like a seat and less like the piece of garbage I was just throwing together. And all that is an extra piece of foam glued in at the top. And as you can see, like, I'm doing zero sewing. I'm just cutting this and using the headliner adhesive and like doing a poor job of wrapping a present. But all the nastiness is in the back, and you glue it in place and pretty much looks like a seat. So there's one last thing that I've got to do, which is, well, here, let me show you on the other car. So something on the GD40 I did is I made this insert here, and this is just a lot of foam put together and wrapped in Nomex. And that was to get me the right angle to fit in here and have my feet reach the pedals. But it's nice that this isn't part of the seat in that it just comes out. And, you know, when I'm strapped in, it's held in place really well. But then when I have other people drive the car, especially if they're shorter than, if they're taller, we take that out. If they're shorter than me, I just put other foam inserts in there. And I have one I got off an office chair. One's just like a knee pad from Harbor Freight. Just anything to get them closer to the pedals. So we're going to do that same kind of thing with this here. That one was made with this thing called a backsaver pad you get from Pegasus Auto Racing. And that backsaver pad material is amazing. It feels so great. It's firm but soft at the same time. Fortunately, it is ridiculously expensive. A 3-foot by 2-foot sheet is almost $300. And I was actually willing, I was going to get the smaller size sheet to make this particular thing out of. But in the end, I didn't, because they were out of stock and it was going to be like months till they could ship it. So I said, you know, we're not going to spend that much on foam. So anyway, so what we're doing here, and I'm just going to show you the process just so this is completely demystified and you see just how simple and poor a job I'm doing. This is just 3 pieces of foam, and I stack them in the back so that the top piece, because they're a 1/2 inch thick, you know, rather than it being jagged, this just kind of smooths it out. And we'll wrap all this in Nomex. I've got a little bit of red Nomex left over from when I did the GD40 seat, so I'm going to do that just to give this, you know, some color accents and look like we care. So on this project, I was thinking about doing a more elaborate seat, something that looks more like a seat, and the reason was really for looks. The thing is, making sure there's enough room for me. You know, me in most race cars means you take the seat out and I sit on the bare metal. And this, as it is fine sitting on the bare metal. This is more comfortable the way it is now. But the thing that I've learned, this is pretty much how I made the seats in the GD40. And I'd like to make better seats for the GD40. But one of the things that stops me, besides the money it costs, is the seats in there work great. They're comfortable. It fits multiple drivers. They hold you in place. So I kind of just keep doing this weird thing. So what I'm going to do, and you'll see me do it, is I'm going to spray adhesive on these 3 parts, glue them together, and then spray another round of adhesive and wrap it in Nomex. Okay, there it is. See the add cushion in there. And that is our seat finished. Obviously this is pretty low cost. Honestly, working with an upholsterer, I've found a lot of them to be really reasonable as far as the price goes for the quality of work they do. You don't have to spend a lot to get really amazing work. So working with an upholsterer is definitely a great option. I just don't have one at the moment, and I like doing everything myself with whatever little stuff I can. All right, what's next?